I'm going to follow up on a very hot take I've already shared on my channel, which is that the Colin Penelope carriage scene should have been longer.
I'd very much like to be more than friends.
You gotta put your fingers in the holes.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I like to talk about entertainment media. If you are watching this video before Season 3 Part 2 is released, that probably means that I was editing while jet-lagged back in my motherland. Also, this video is voiceover only because I recorded it a bit randomly. I was at the airport and then my flight got delayed twice and then the flight got canceled and then I went to a hotel, so I had a bit of free time to sit and record a bit of voiceover for yet another unexpected, not quite fully planned Bridgerton video. What can I say? I figured I might as well do something productive with the unexpected free time. If you're one of my regular viewers, this video is a follow-up to the other video that I did comparing some of the major relationship moments between Colin and Penelope in the book Romancing Mr. Bridgerton compared to how those moments were in Season 3 Part 1, since they still won't let me talk about Part 2 yet. You can thank the press embargo for that one. In that video, I compared the meet cute, the hand cut scene, the first kiss, and of course, the much discussed carriage scene. If you haven't watched that video, I was explaining how I liked the carriage scene more in the book than I did the show, simply because of the fact that in the book, Colin already knew that Penelope was Lady Whistledown, and because Colin and Penelope get to have an extremely long conversation going through a lot of things in their relationship before the salacious part of the carriage ride begins. I opted to not read the full conversation, at least partially because I thought that it would make the video far too long and then people would not want to even click on the video to watch it in the first place. But then I got a morbid sense of curiosity about how long the runtime would actually be if I were to read the full conversation out loud, and I figured that if I was already leaning towards that idea, I might as well go ahead and record that and see for myself. Before we get into the rest of this video, I want to remind everyone that donation links for Palestine are in the description box, and if you don't have the disposable income to donate, you can instead stream HIND'S HALL by MACKLEMORE, as all proceeds will be going to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. To catch you up, in case you didn't watch my other video in which I talked about this carriage scene, here is a quick recap of what leads up to the carriage scene in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This obviously means that there will be book spoilers, and by extension, there may potentially be further spoilers for Season 3, so if you do not want to know about any of those things just yet, you are more than welcome to circle back to this video after Part 2 has been released on Netflix. So Colin is going to visit Penelope when he spots her getting into a carriage that is not one that belongs to the Featherington household. His curiosity gets piqued, so he follows her like he's Joe freaking Goldberg all the way to the city, all the way to downtown, whatever it is that you would like to call it. She gets out of the carriage at a church. She then goes inside to drop off a newsletter at a designated spot. Colin follows her inside, confronts her, snatches up her letter, and opens it. And this is how he, and the reader of the book itself, discovers that Penelope Featherington is in fact Lady Whistledown. At this point in the book, Penelope had already decided to quit being Lady Whistledown and announced that she was quitting in one of Lady Whistledown's issues. But after Lady Danbury issues a challenge to the Ton, where whomever would uncover the identity of Lady Whistledown would be winning a cash prize of £1,000, Cressida had decided to come forward, alleging that she herself is Lady Whistledown because Cressida wanted that prize money. See, Cressida in the book has already been married and widowed by this point, and her former husband, that is now dead, he more or less left her penniless, or at least that's the case by the standards of the rich people of the Ton. But since Cressida has been such an insufferable, nasty, mean-spirited bully to Penelope, Penelope simply cannot stand for this. She is not about to let one of the most nefarious figures in the Ton, particularly to Penelope herself, take credit for what amounts to Penelope's life's work. This is why she decided to go back on her plan to quit Lady Whistledown and release a new letter in order to debunk the idea that Cressida is Lady Whistledown. So when Penelope is caught caught by Colin, she runs out of the church to try to catch her carriage, but that hired carriage has left her there. So Colin comes outside and he orders another carriage to take the pair of them back to their homes. And that is where I am going to start. But I will stop reading once it starts to get to the more saucy parts of the carriage ride. So if you would like to read that part of the carriage scene, I would just simply tell you to look up the book yourself, because I'm not about to read that part and incur the wrath of YouTube for speaking at length about Colin and Penelope being intimate.
Intimate? Is that how old people say sex?
He jerked his head toward the street. Into the carriage. She went, climbing up as she heard Colin give the driver her address and then instruct him to take the long way. Oh, God. They'd been moving a good 30 seconds before he handed her the single sheet of paper that had been folded into the envelope she'd left in the church. I believe this is yours, he said. She gulped and looked down. Not that she needed to. She already had the words memorized. She'd written and rewritten them so many times the previous night, she didn't think they'd ever escape her memory. There is nothing I despise more than a gentleman who thinks it amusing to give a lady a condescending pat on the hand as he murmurs, "It is a woman's prerogative to change her mind." And indeed, because I feel one should always support one's words with one's actions, I endeavor to keep my opinions and decisions steadfast and true, which is why, gentle reader, when I wrote my column of the 19th of April, I truly intended it to be my last. However, events entirely beyond my control, or indeed beyond my approval, force me to put my pen to paper one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, this author is not Lady Cressida Toombley. She is nothing more than a scheming impostor, and it would break my heart to see my years of hard work attributed to one such as her. Lady Whistledown Society Papers, the 21st of April, 1824. Penelope refolded the paper with great decision, using the time to try to compose herself and figure out what on earth she was supposed to say at a moment like that. Finally, she attempted a smile, didn't quite meet his eyes, and joked, "Did you guess?" He didn't say anything, so she was forced to look up. She immediately wished she hadn't. Colin looked completely unlike himself. The easy smile that always tugged at his lips, the good humor forever lurking in his eyes, they were all gone, replaced by harsh lines and cold, pure ice. The man she knew, the man she'd loved for so very long, she didn't know who he was anymore. "I'll take that as a no," she said shakily. "Do you know what I am trying to do right now?" he asked, his voice startling and loud against the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves. She opened her mouth to say no, but one look at his face told her he didn't desire an answer, so she held her tongue. "I am trying to decide what, precisely, I am most angry with you about," he said, "because there are so many things, so very many things, that I am finding it extraordinarily difficult to focus upon just one." It was on the tip of Penelope's tongue to suggest something. Her deception was a likely place to start, but on second thought, now seemed an excellent time to hold her counsel. "First of all," he said, the terribly even tone of his voice suggesting that he was trying very hard to keep his temper in check. And this was, in and of itself, rather disturbing, as she hadn't been aware that Colin even possessed a temper. "I cannot believe you were stupid enough to venture into the city by yourself, and in a hired hack, no less." "I could hardly go by myself in one of our own carriages," Penelope blurted out before she remembered that she'd meant to remain silent. His head moved about an inch to the left. She didn't know what that meant, but she couldn't imagine it was good, especially since it almost seemed as if his neck were tightening as it twisted. "I beg your pardon?" he asked, his voice still that awful blend of satin and steel. Well, now she had to answer, didn't she? It's nothing," she said, hoping the evasion would reduce his attention on the rest of her reply. "Just that I'm not allowed to go out by myself." "I am aware of that," he bit off. "There's a damned good reason for it, too." "So if I wanted to go out by myself," she continued, choosing to ignore the second part of his reply, "I couldn't very well use one of our carriages. None of our drivers would agree to take me here." "Your drivers," he snapped, "are clearly men of impeccable wisdom and sense." Penelope said nothing. "Do you have any idea what could have happened to you?" he demanded, his sharp mask of control beginning to crack. Very little, actually," she said, gulping on the sentence. "I've come here before and—" "What?" His hand closed over her upper arm with painful force. "What did you just say?" Repeating it seemed almost dangerous to her health, so Penelope just stared at him, hoping that maybe she could break through the wild anger in his eyes and find the man she knew and loved so dearly. It's only when I need to leave an urgent message for my publisher, she explained. I send a coded message, then he knows to pick up my note here. And speaking of which, Colin said roughly, snatching the folded paper back from her hands, what the hell is this? Penelope stared at him in confusion. I would have thought it was obvious. Yes, of course you're bloody Lady Whistledown. And you've probably been laughing at me for weeks as I insisted it was Eloise. His face twisted as he spoke, nearly breaking her heart. No, she cried out. No, Colin, never. I would never laugh at you. But his face told her clearly that he did not believe her. There was humiliation in his emerald eyes, something she'd never seen there, something she'd never expected to see. He was a Bridgerton. He was popular, confident, self-possessed. Nothing could embarrass him. No one could humiliate him. Except, apparently, her. I couldn't tell you, she whispered, desperately trying to make that awful look in his eyes go away. Surely you knew I couldn't tell you. He was silent for an agonizingly long moment, and then, as if she'd never spoken, never tried to explain herself, he lifted the incriminating sheet of paper into the air and shook it, completely disregarding her impassioned outcry. This is stupidity, he said. Have you lost your mind? I don't know what you mean. You had a perfectly good escape, just waiting for you. Cressida Toombley was willing to take the blame for you. And then suddenly his hands were on her shoulders and he was holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Why couldn't you just let it die, Penelope? His voice was urgent, his eyes blazing. It was the most feeling she'd ever seen in him, and it broke her heart that it was directed toward her in anger and in shame. I couldn't let her do it, she whispered. I couldn't let her be me. Why the hell not? Penelope could do nothing but stare for several seconds. Because, she flailed, wondering how she was supposed to explain this. Her heart was breaking, her most terrifying and exhilarating secret had been shattered, and he thought she had the presence of mind to explain herself? I realize she's quite possibly the biggest bitch, Penelope gasped, that England has produced in this generation at least. But for God's sake, Penelope! He raked his hand through his hair, then fixed a hard stare on her face. She was going to take the blame, the credit, Penelope interrupted testily. The blame, he continued. Do you have any idea what will happen to you if people find out who you really are? The corners of her lips tightened with impatience and irritation at being so obviously condescended to. I've had over a decade to ruminate the possibility. His eyes narrowed. Are you being sarcastic? Not at all, she shot back. Do you really think I haven't spent a good portion of the last 10 years of my life contemplating what would happen if I were found out? I'd be a blind idiot if I hadn't. He grabbed her by the shoulders, holding tight even as the carriage bumped over uneven cobbles. You will be ruined, Penelope. Ruined! Do you understand what I am saying? If I did not, she replied, I assure you I would now, after your lengthy dissertations on the subject when you were accusing Eloise of being Lady Whistledown. He scowled, obviously annoyed at having his errors thrown in his face. People will stop talking to you, he continued. They will cut you dead. People never talk to me, she snapped. Half the time they didn't even know I was there. How do you think I was able to keep up the ruse for so long in the first place? I was invisible, Colin. No one saw me. No one talked to me. I just stood and listened, and no one noticed. That's not true, but his eyes slid from hers as he said it. Oh, it is true, and you know it. You only deny it, she said, jabbing him in the arm, because you feel guilty. I do not! Oh, please, she scoffed. Everything you do out of guilt. Pen, that involves me at least, she corrected. Her breath was rushing through her throat, and her skin was pricking with heat, and for once, her soul was on fire. Do you think I don't know how your family pities me? Do you think it escapes my notice that anytime you or your brothers happen to be at the same party as me, you ask me to dance? We're polite, he ground out, and we like you. And you feel sorry for me. You like Felicity, but I don't see you dancing with her every time your paths cross. He let go of her quite suddenly and crossed his arms. Well, I don't like her as well as I do you. She blinked, knocked rather neatly off her verbal stride. Trust him to go and compliment her in the middle of an argument. Nothing could have disarmed her more. And, he continued with a rather arch and superior lifting of his chin, you have not addressed my original point, which was that Lady Whistledown will ruin you. For God's sake, she muttered. You talk as if she were a separate person. Well, excuse me if I still have difficulty reconciling the woman in front of me with the harridan writing the column. Colin! Insulted? He mocked. Yes, I've worked very hard on that column. She clenched her fists around the thin fabric of her mint green morning dress, oblivious to the wrinkled spirals she was creating. She had to do something with her hands, or she'd quite possibly explode with the nervous energy and anger coursing through her veins. Her only other option seemed to be crossing her arms, and she refused to give in to such an obvious show of petulance. Besides, he was crossing his arms, and one of them needed to act older than 6. I wouldn't dream of denigrating what you've done, he said condescendingly. Of course you would, she interrupted. No, I wouldn't. Then what do you think you're doing? Being an adult, he answered, his voice growing loud and impatient. One of us has to be. Don't you dare speak to me of adult behavior, she exploded. You, who run at the very hint of responsibility. And what the hell does that mean? He bet off. I thought it was rather obvious. He drew back. I can't believe you're speaking to me like this. You can't believe I'm doing it? She taunted. Or that I possess the nerve to do so. He just stared at her, obviously surprised by her question. There's more to me than you think, Colin, she said. And then, in a quieter tone of voice, she added, there's more to me than I used to think. He said nothing for several moments, and then, as if he just couldn't drag himself away from the topic, he asked, practically between his teeth, what did you mean when you said I run from responsibility? She pursed her lips, then relaxed as she let out what she hoped would be a calming exhale. Why do you think you travel so much? Because I like it, he replied, his tone clipped. And because you're bored out of your mind here in England. And that makes me a child because you're not willing to grow up and do something adult that would keep you in one place. Like what? Her hands came up in an I should think it was obvious sort of gesture. Like get married? Is that a proposal? He mocked, one corner of his mouth rising into a rather insolent smile. She could feel her cheeks flushing deep and hot, but she forced herself to continue. You know it's not, and don't try to change the subject by being deliberately cruel. She waited for him to say something, perhaps an apology. His silence was an insult, and so she let out a snort and said, For heaven's sake, Colin, you're 3 and 30. And you're 8 and 20, he pointed out, and not in a particularly kind tone of voice. It felt like a punch in the belly, but she was too riled up to retreat into her familiar shell. Unlike you, she said with low precision, I don't have the luxury of asking someone. And unlike you, she added, her intention now solely to induce the guilt she'd accused him of just minutes earlier, I don't have a massive pool of prospective suitors, so I've never had the luxury of saying no. His lips tightened. And you think that your unveiling as Lady Whistledown is going to increase the number of your suitors? Are you trying to be insulting? She ground out. I'm trying to be realistic, something which you seem to have completely lost sight of. I never said I was planning to unveil myself as Lady Whistledown. He snatched the envelope with the final column in it back up off the cushioned bench. Then what is this about? She grabbed it back, yanking the paper from the envelope. I beg your pardon, she said, every syllable heavy with sarcasm. I must have missed the sentence proclaiming my identity. You think this swan song of yours will do anything to dampen the frenzy of interest in Lady Whistledown's identity? Oh, excuse me. He placed one insolent hand over his heart. Perhaps I should have said your identity. After all, I don't want to deny you your credit. Now you're just being ugly, she said, a little voice at the back of her brain wondering why she wasn't crying by now. This was Colin, and she'd loved him forever, and he was acting as if he hated her. Was there anything else in the world more worthy of tears? Or maybe that wasn't it at all. Maybe all this sadness building up inside of her was for the death of a dream. Her dream of him. She'd built up the perfect image of him in her mind, and with every word he spat in her face. It was becoming more and more obvious that her dream was quite simply wrong. I'm making a point, he said, snatching the paper back from her hands. Look at this. It might as well be an invitation for further investigation. You're mocking society, daring them to uncover you. That's not at all what I'm doing. It may not be your intention, but it is certainly the end result. He probably had something of a point there, but she was loath to give him credit for it. It's a chance I'll have to take, she replied, crossing her arms and looking pointedly away from him. I've gone 11 years without detection. I don't see why I'm in need of undue worry now. His breath left him in a short punch of exasperation. Do you have any concept of money? Any idea how many people would like Lady Danbury's £1,000? I have more of a concept of money than you do, she replied, bristling at the insult. And besides, Lady Danbury's reward doesn't make my secret any more vulnerable. It makes everyone else more determined, and that makes you more vulnerable. Not to mention, he added with a wry twist to his lips, as my youngest sister pointed out, there is the glory. Hyacinth? She asked. He nodded grimly, setting the paper down on the bench beside him. And if Hyacinth thinks the glory at having uncovered your identity is enviable, then you can be sure she's not the only one. It may very well be why Cressida is pursuing her stupid ruse. Cressida's doing it for the money, Penelope grumbled. I'm sure of it. Fine. It doesn't matter why she's doing it. All that matters is that she is. And once you dispose of her with your idiocy, he slammed his hand against the paper, causing Penelope to wince as a loud crinkle filled the air, someone else will take her place. This is nothing I don't already know, she said, mostly because she couldn't bear to give him the last word. Then for the love of God, woman, he burst out, let Cressida get away with her scheme. She's the answer to your prayers. Her eyes snapped up to his. You don't know my prayers. Something in her tone hit Colin squarely in the chest. She hadn't changed his mind, hadn't even budged it, but he couldn't seem to find the right words to fill the moment. He looked at her, then he looked out the window, his mind absently focusing on the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. We really are taking the long way home, he murmured. She didn't say anything. He didn't blame her. It had been a stupid non sequitur, words to fill the silence and nothing else. If you let Cressida, he began. Stop, she implored him. Please, don't say any more. I can't let her do it. Have you really thought about what you'd gain? She looked at him sharply. Do you think I've been able to think of anything else these past few days? He tried another tactic. Does it truly matter that people know you were Lady Whistledown? You know that you were clever and fooled us all. Can't that be enough? You're not listening to me! Her mouth remained frozen open in an odd, incredulous oval, as if she couldn't quite believe that he didn't understand what she was saying. I don't need for people to know it was me. I just need for them to know it wasn't her. But clearly you don't mind if people think someone else is Lady Whistledown, he insisted. After all, you've been accusing Lady Danbury for weeks. I had to accuse someone, she explained. Lady Danbury asked me point blank who I thought it was, and I couldn't very well say myself. Besides, it wouldn't be so very bad if people thought it was Lady Danbury. At least I like Lady Danbury. Penelope, how would you feel if your journals were published with Nigel Burbrook as the author? She demanded. Nigel Burbrook can barely string 2 sentences together, he said with a derisive snort. I hardly think anyone would believe he could have written my journals. As an afterthought, he gave her a little nod as an apology since Burbrook was, after all, married to her sister. Try to imagine it, she ground out. Or substitute whomever you think is similar to Cressida. Penelope, he sighed. I'm not you. You can't compare the two. Besides, if I were to publish my journals, they would hardly ruin me in the eyes of society. She deflated in her seat, sighing loudly, and he knew that his point had been well made. Good, he announced. Then it is decided. We will tear this up. He reached for the sheet of paper. No, she cried out, practically leaping from her seat. Don't. But you just said... I said nothing, she shrilled. All I did was sigh. Oh, for God's sake, Penelope, he said testily. You clearly agreed with... She gaped at his audacity. When did I give you leave to interpret my sighs? He looked at the incriminating paper, still held in his hands, and wondered what on earth he was meant to do with it at this moment. And anyway, she continued, her eyes flashing with an anger and fire that made her almost beautiful, it isn't as if I don't have every last word memorized. You can destroy that paper, but you can't destroy me. I'd like to, he muttered. What did you say? Whistledown, he ground out. I'd like to destroy Whistledown. You, I'm happy to leave as is. But I am Whistledown. God help us all. And then something within her simply snapped. All her rage, all her frustration, every last negative feeling she'd kept bottled up inside over the years broke forth, all directed at Colin, who, of all the Tawn, was probably the least deserving of it. Why are you so angry with me? She burst out. What have I done that is so repellent? Been cleverer than you? Kept a secret? Had a good laugh at the expense of society? Penelope, you... No, she said forcefully. You be quiet. It's my turn to speak. His jaw went slack as he stared at her, shock and disbelief crowding in his eyes. I am proud of what I've done, she managed to say, her voice shaking with emotion. I don't care what you say. I don't care what anyone says. No one can take that from me. I'm not trying to... I don't need for people to know the truth, she said, jumping on top of his ill-timed protest. But I will be damned if I allow Cressida Toombley, the very person who... Her entire body was trembling now, as memory after memory swept over her, all of them bad. Cressida. renowned for her grace and carriage, tripping and spilling punch on Penelope's gown that first year. The only one her mother had allowed her to buy that wasn't yellow or orange. Cressida, sweetly begging young bachelors to ask Penelope to dance, her requests made with such volume and fervor that Penelope could only be mortified by them. Cressida, saying before a crowd how worried she was about Penelope's appearance. "It's just not healthful to weigh more than 10 stone at our age," she'd cooed. Penelope never knew whether Cressida had been able to hide her smirk following her barb. She'd fled the room, blinded by tears, unable to ignore the way her hips jiggled as she ran away. Cressida had always known exactly where to stick her sword, and she'd known how to twist her bayonet. It didn't matter that Eloise remained Penelope's champion, or that Lady Bridgerton always tried to bolster her confidence. Penelope had cried herself to sleep more times than she could remember, always due to some well-placed barb from Cressida Cowper Tombly. She'd let Cressida get away with so much in the past, all because she hadn't the courage to stand up for herself. But she couldn't let Cressida have this, not her secret life, not the one little corner of her soul that was strong and proud and completely without fear. Penelope might not know how to defend herself, but by God, Lady Whistledown did. "Penelope?" Colin asked cautiously. She looked at him blankly, taking several seconds to remember that it was 1824, not 1814, and she was here in a carriage with Colin Bridgerton, not cowering in the corner of a ballroom trying to escape Cressida Cowper. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, or at least she tried to. He opened his mouth to say something, then paused, his lips remaining parted for several seconds. Finally, he just placed his hand on hers, saying, "We'll talk about this later?" This time she did manage a short nod, and truly, she just wanted the entire awful afternoon to be over, but there was one thing she couldn't quite let go of yet. "Cressida wasn't ruined," she said quietly. He turned to her, a slight veil of confusion descending over his eyes. "I beg your pardon?" Her voice rose slightly in volume. "Cressida said she was Lady Whistledown, and she wasn't ruined." "That's because no one believed her," Colin replied. "And besides," he added without thinking, "she's different." She turned to him slowly, very slowly, with steadfast eyes. "Different? How?" Something akin to panic began to pound in Colin's chest. He'd known he wasn't saying the right words even as they'd spilled from his lips. How could one little sentence, one little word be so very wrong? "She's different." They both knew what he'd meant. Cressida was popular, Cressida was beautiful, Cressida could carry it all off with aplomb. Penelope, on the other hand, she was Penelope, Penelope Featherington, and she hadn't the clout nor the connections to save her from ruin. The Bridgertons could stand behind her and offer support, but even they wouldn't be able to prevent her downfall. Any other scandal might have been manageable, but Lady Whistledown had, at one time or another, insulted almost every person of consequence in the British Isles. Once people were over their surprise, that was when the unkind remarks would begin. Penelope wouldn't be praised for being clever or witty or daring. She'd be called mean and petty and jealous. Colin knew the ton well. He knew how his peers acted. The aristocracy was capable of individual greatness, but collectively they tended to sink to the lowest common denominator, which was very low indeed. "I see," Penelope said into the silence. "No," he said quickly. "You don't. No, Colin," she said, sounding almost painfully wise. "I do. I suppose I just always hoped you were different." His eyes caught hers, and somehow his hands were on her shoulders, gripping her with such intensity that she couldn't possibly look away. He didn't say anything, letting his eyes ask his questions. "I thought you believed in me," she said, "that you saw beyond the ugly duckling." Her face was so familiar to him. He'd seen it 1,000 times before, and yet, until these past few weeks, he couldn't have said he truly knew it. Would he have remembered that she had a small birthmark near her left earlobe? Had he ever noticed the warm glow to her skin, or that her brown eyes had flecks of gold in them, right near the pupil? How had he danced with her so many times and never noticed that her mouth was full and wide and made for kissing? She licked her lips when she was nervous. He'd seen her do that just the other day. Surely she'd done that at some point in the dozen years of their acquaintance, and yet it was only now that the mere sight of her tongue made his body clench with need. "You're not ugly," he told her, his voice low and urgent. Her eyes widened, and he whispered, "You're beautiful." "No," she said, the word barely more than a breath. "Don't say things you don't mean." His fingers dug into her shoulders. "You're beautiful," he repeated. "I don't know how. I don't know when." He touched her lips, feeling her hot breath on his fingertips. "But you are," he whispered. He leaned forward and kissed her, slowly, reverently, no longer quite so surprised that this was happening, that he wanted her so badly. The shock was gone, replaced by a simple, primitive need to claim her, to brand her, to mark her as his. His? He pulled back and looked at her for a moment, his eyes searching her face. Why not? What is it? She whispered. You are beautiful, he said, shaking his head in confusion. I don't know why nobody else sees it. So now that I've read all of that, like I said before in my other video, it is in fact quite long. You can see why I went back and forth about whether or not I would read it in a video because of how long it is and how many things it covers. The question that I now want to pose to all of you who have sat through this scene with me is how much or how little of this scene from the book do you think should have been adapted into the carriage scene for the show? Because personally, I would have wanted at least, I don't know, maybe 60-70% of this, if not more, if I had gotten my way. There was a lot of decent material in here that I wish they could have covered, even if they had to make some slight alterations to certain topics that they were discussing to make it fit a bit more closely to the canon of the show as it's unfolded for the audience, particularly those that have not read the book and only watched the series. Now, obviously, we already talked in the other video about how we do not condone, nor do we like, the arm grabbing thing, but that is something that I will reiterate is a very easy facet to simply remove altogether once you start brainstorming to make the outline for the season. As far as dialogue goes, the main thing I have wanted more of for Colin and Penelope this season, when they are now the main couple of the show, is to just have more of them talking to each other. Every time they've had a cute moment together on the show in part 1 where they're either talking or laughing or reminiscing together about their friendship and their relationship, it gets immediately interrupted by some other side plot that I do not want to see, nor did I ask for, when there are only 8 episodes per season. I've referenced Sense8 before when we were talking about how this season is overstuffing these episodes and how Sense8 was a series that actually struck the right balance of making sure that everyone in the main ensemble had their fair share of material. You had 12 episodes in season 1, then you had a special, then you had 10 episodes for season 2, and then they had a film to wrap things up when the show got canceled on a cliffhanger, and the fans viscerally, loudly, aggressively raged against the machine and won. So we were able to get that film to wrap up all those loose ends. Now, whether it was 12 episodes or 10 episodes, they made that count work. And I think Bridgerton could learn a lot from Sense8, both on a creative and corporate level. Sense8 is an example of how corporate needs to do more than 8 episodes per season. They're the ones that have the most say about that particular detail, and 8 episodes is not enough. And Sense8 is also an example of how to strike the right creative balance to doing an ensemble story well if the show is in fact going to insist on being overly stubborn about the ensemble concept to so much of an extent that it's a detriment to the main couple of each season. Sense8 also had multiple romantic storylines happening at once, and even if these various romantic couplings or clusters had less of a percentage of airtime overall of the total runtime than they would have if the show had been framed in such a way to prioritize one specific romantic storyline over all of the others, each romantic cluster felt like it had the room to breathe in a way that I personally don't feel like Colin and Penelope have been able to have in these first 4 episodes. The carriage scene adaptation is merely an example of that. There's so much exploration for this scene in the book that by the time Colin and Penelope actually start to touch, the physical intimacy feels more earned at that point and emotionally impactful, whereas the show's version of the carriage scene, I've seen some people in my comments saying that it felt too rushed and that it felt like Colin's attraction to Penelope was more physical without enough of the emotional layers that you want to have for a big Regency romance. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's my exact opinion, since I have had to go over so many things in these episodes a certain number of times in order to be able to prepare a lot of the videos that I have put together thus far for my channel. That essentially makes it feel like I've been going over the material with a magnifying glass, and as a result of that, I feel like I'm inclined to pick up on a couple more details here and there, but even so, I can absolutely understand why I get multiple comments trickling in here and there with that point of view. it's not unreasonable for that to be the interpretation that some viewers have of how the story has been executed. Moreover, I've definitely seen comments trickling in on my channel from various Pollen shippers who have said that they really wanted to see more material for the two of them together in part 1 of their season. That's what season 3 is. Now, maybe this is my bias, but even though the Lady Whistledown concept is one that involves secrecy and sneaking around, in a season where Penelope is one of the main characters and Penelope is played by Nicola Coughlan, I definitely wish that Penelope had more lines, not less. I definitely would have loved to see her do a big monologue in the carriage scene where she makes Colin just sit down and listen to her.
Stop talking, Henry.